Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Netling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome everyone to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Netling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is sharing topics and guests that will empower you to grow as a confident leader and take your business or your life to the next level. Today, I'm very happy to have Myles Wakeham on my show. I'm going to sneeze. We'll have my daughter cut that out. That's a first. Today, my guest is Myles Wakeham, and let me tell you a little bit about Myles. Myles is an Australian who migrated to the USA in 1989 and has since become a multi-millionaire, lives 100% free and unconstrained life, no job, yet never graduated from high school, let alone went to college. He is a self-made business-focused technologist who was one of the early members of the Biotechnology Corporation, Amgen, now largest biotech company in the world, has made fortune on Bitcoin since 2011, owns a portfolio of rental properties. Myles was one of the few survivors of a massive auto accident in the outback in Australia in the 1990s, which forced him to question life, purpose, and direction. Since rebuilding himself from that, he knows how to handle and migrate adversity, including taking advantage of medical tourism all over the world for major surgeries. He has honed those skills to live a life unconstrained. He spends 50% of his time in the US and 50% of his time roaming the world, seeking out new opportunities, and teaches the art of financial sustainability to his audience. He has a book coming out on the subject, as well as an audio course, Success in the Rental Real Estate. And in 2021, Myles and his wife bought a large compound in central Mexico with a bullfighting ring in it and are in the process of demolition and development to turn it into a luxury home and world-class recording studio. Just one more adventure for Myles. So cool. Today, I thought we'd talk about financial independence. I'm sure that's on a lot of people's minds today. And so please welcome Myles Wakeham to talk to us about financial independence. Hey, Myles.
Oh, hey, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And so we always start with an easy question. Just tell everyone, I gave a clue as to something about where you live, but where in the US do you call home?
Oh, I don't know anymore. I guess when I'm in the United States, we have a property in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I guess I would call that home. Although these days I'm spending less time there as I have my projects in other corners. Yeah, I'm in Mexico right now. So it's kind of indicative of what's going on this year.
Yeah. I can't imagine that that's an easy process to turn a bull ring into
Well, the bull ring's gone now. We demoed that, so we're back to land again. And yeah, I'm dealing with foundations and all the challenges that goes with an acre of land and building a lot of structures on it. So
in a foreign area that you don't have your favorite workers and things.
That's nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, I can make every excuse under the sun why something is too hard, and then I would do nothing and be miserable. So I tend to gravitate towards I guess I'm the guy who goes into the burning buildings when everyone else is running out, and I tend to find all the nice little trinkets are left behind when I do that. So consequently, that's just the nature of the way it is.
When it's comes with a lot of effort and hard, whenever it's all done, you appreciate it, I think, so much more.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's something also I noticed. It's funny. I left Australia when I was 25. So I had my youth and my upbringing and my, I guess, adulthood occurred while I was in Australia. And I start realizing when I left and having spent a lot of time outside of Australia that there's a lot of interesting character traits that we have that we don't really celebrate much in Australia. But the one that seems to come back to haunt me all the time is that you're raised in a country where everything crawling around on the ground will kill you.
That's so true.
And God forbid you step in the water because there's a jellyfish, who's got your name on it. I mean, and it's sharks everywhere and crocodiles in the north. And it's amazing anyone survives in that country. But even at school, you're taught survival. It's like you get math, history, English, and survival. But that's normal there because, that's how it is. You were taught at a young age how to exist in the outback and find water, how to start a fire without any matches and things like that. The stuff, I guess, like, maybe the scouting movement would teach people. But the average person in Australia, that's part of your schooling. I started realizing that if you're ground to assume that that's normal, you get this kind of innate ability to mitigate risk. And once you kind of become comfortable with the fact that everything's going to kill you, so you just tread lightly and you're sensitive to nature and you're sensitive to things around you, it's actually quite empowering, because what it ends up doing is that you can transform that into business and into like the projects I do all over the world. And, I'm not trying to be Ernest Hemingway living, but at the same time, I start realizing that when the well starts drying up of opportunities in one place where you are, then just get a plane ticket and go to somewhere else. Yeah. And that's kind of been my mantra, I guess.
So funny. A few things that you said brought some memories to me. First of all, first time I realized everything that you just said about Australia was there was a Toastmaster that came to a meeting and she talked about her trip to Australia, and her trip was everything there will kill you. And she just went down the list like you did of, the flowers, the plant, the animals, the sharks, everything, nowhere you. But I think too that your point about having that sense of awareness of your surroundings, that detail orientedness, is really a strength for sure in business.
Yeah, I think that once you start becoming a bit more comfortable with that, you can train yourself to transcend it. And then you don't think so much about it. The risk mitigation becomes subconscious. Yeah. And you become a bit more streetwise, but it's not really in an urban sense. I mean, we're talking more just, and it's a weird thing. I was thinking about this the other day. One of the things that we learn in Australia, which has really served me very well, is to understand that we're not anything more than just another species, and we're just as much subject to being somebody else's lunch as we are
Yeah.
about, eating. And we have to be humble in that role. Having said that, we also have these enormous, powerful strengths. We're at our best when times are at their worst, which is not something you see in other species. We're also incredibly gifted tool makers. We make things to help us, which allows us to kind of scale and to evolve at this rapid pace. And these are wonderful characteristics, but at the same time, we have all these flaws: greed, envy, fear of missing out, dominance, all these things that are very dangerous and have to be managed as well. You start realizing that, every other species has its pros and cons too. The fact is that we all exist in this world of what I would call kind of cycles or polarities. And a lot of it is driven by a positive and negative balance in everything. Our planet wouldn't spin if it didn't have a north and a south pole with its magnetic forces. The sun rises, the sun sets, the moon rises, the moon sets, the waves, rise and fall. I mean, these are just normal things that we just take for granted. Even the fact that we can communicate right now is because sound is a resonance in terms of cycles and waves. And what I did was learning that at a very young age, particularly when I learned how to surf. I started to, for some reason, I could connect these normal, everyday, universal cycles and kind of put them into a business sense. And as a result, I spent, and I learned this the hard way. I was somebody who had a business when I was 17 years old, employing people, doing, big projects in the software business, and working, I don't know, 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week, just because that's what it is. When you run your own business, the buck stops on your desk and you just work it. And I did this for years and years and years. When I came to the United States, I brought the same work ethic with me, and I toiled the same way. Yes, it did work out fine for me in terms of benefit, but those benefits didn't necessarily come from my toil. They came from situational advantage. I walked into a startup when there was no one there. They gave me a ton of stock options because they had to incentivize people to go and work there. I had no idea this was going to turn into a biotech corporation that was, on the S&P, and my stock options were worth millions. I had no idea, but that was luck. It wasn't hard work. I was not going for that. I just wanted a job, and I was proud of what I did and what I could bring as value to the company, but I didn't expect that. When I got it, I kind of recoiled from it. It didn't work well. It's like that old thing when people win the lottery, they lose it in 2 years. It kind of felt that way. It wasn't real. And I started realizing that true wealth was coming not from toil or from skill or from inventiveness. It was coming from something more powerful than that. And I start realizing when I speak to business entrepreneurs, business leaders, that often they're too full of themselves. The reality is they will equate their own ego as being the reason why big things happen. But I can tell you, as this sort of humble little Australian guy, that big things are happening outside of the human species every single second of every single day. And I became rich by tapping into that, not by trying to control it. And I learned this as a surfer. You can't control a wave. A wave doesn't care about you. If you think you can fight it, it'll throw you down and hurt you bad. But if you start understanding how it works, you look for patterns, you get in front of it, you don't become an adversary to it, you become something that's symbiotic with it. It will pick you up and it will transfer its power to you, and you will get the ride of your life. The second I learned that, I got rich. That's awesome. What's the missing link that no one teaches you in school. I mean, here, I didn't even finish high school and I can tell you that.
That's awesome. And it is. It's like the old saying, go with the flow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to say to people, don't work hard. I'm not saying that,
Correct.
or don't,
Correct.
I'm saying that don't take yourself so seriously because
Mm.
there are bigger factors at stake. And if you can somehow just transcend the ego, you'll see it. I'm sounding like the Dalai Lama now. I'm not trying to. I'm just saying that would be one reason that I've discovered traveling around the world. It always seems to follow true, in that I look at advantage. I'm here in Mexico right now because a number of years back, there's many reasons, but a number of years back, I could see the waning nature of the United States and Chinese trade relationship. I understood, having seen what Australia had gone through with China as a trading partner, that there was a very major downside risk of dealing with a country which in effect was adversarial to its trading partners.
Right.
And as a result of that, I predicted that the United States and most corporations that are choosing to do business in China will probably retreat from that position and find themselves in a difficult state, because if they can't buy cheap Barbie dolls from Shanghai, where are they going to get them? And I predicted Mexico, and it worked correctly. And as a result, I bought property a year ago. It's already doubled in value, almost tripled in value. And it's like, well, because the demand is going to be to here, not to there. I'm in front of the wave, and I'm just waiting for it to crest, and I'll continue riding it until I get off. And I don't know, then I'll go to Ecuador or something. I don't know.
Just, you'll find that solution, right?
Well, you have to participate. If you're in the game, you're not going to get a great ride. And if you're sitting on the beach watching everyone else do it, you've got to go get wet. So you've got to go and be in the moment and be willing to engage. And then you start seeing the truth because you're in it, not because you're watching it from a Twitter feed or a Facebook feed.
One of the things that I remember whenever I was doing project management that was somewhat frustrating, and there is, I'm all about, you should do some pre-planning and things like that, but oftentimes you missed opportunities because you were so busy looking at the future that you miss being present. And I still think people are that way, that they are missing so many opportunities because they are not looking at what they have today and worrying about what's not there yet tomorrow. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, we have such a limited life expectancy that you would want to take advantage of every day to maximize what you can get out of it. And I just feel that that's our finite resource. We can be endlessly wealthy, but we always have a finite number of years on this planet, and we need to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. So why do people throw out the traditional concept of retirement, or why should they throw that out completely? I retired in 2018. I'm 65 now, and I'm happy being busy as can be, doing what I love. So what is your thoughts on why they should throw that out?
It still started to formulate for me when I was about 22. My father passed away unexpectedly, and I was the only child in family. So I had to take the role of looking after my mother and the estate. And it was a very young age, so it was quite formative. I realized that, again, the buck stops at my desk. It's up to me now to be the master on the ship in the choppy waters. And so after you go through the normal grieving process with that, it was then up to me to sort of unwrap his financial affairs so that my mother was going to be taken care of. So I did that alongside my bank manager and trying to work out all of these things he had. He died when he was 67. He retired when he was 65. He was, the quintessential 20th century company man. Worked 40 years in the same job for the same corporation. He died from I guess, complications brought upon from lung cancer. And as it happens, the company he worked for 40 years was a construction material manufacturer, and they specialized in asbestos tiles. So he devoted his life to his cause, which he thought was to serve the company. And the company never served him. In fact, the company killed him. And I'm not saying that it was a direct, it's very hard to correlate direct responsibility to their actions, but I can say in the years that followed, watching their inaction and hiding behind lawyers and avoiding class action lawsuits and all these sorts of things was abhorrent to watch. Having said that, I also realized that my father put aside every important thing in his life that he valued: travel, spending more time with his wife, myself, the family. I didn't really get a chance to get to know him until he retired because he was always busy. And, you know, I cherished those moments. I was on the golf course playing with him because I got to learn who he was as a person, not as a father, but as a person. And that was really powerful. But to have that taken away so quickly was hard.
Yeah.
I looked at the whole thing and I started to realize that this was not an uncommon situation. I could see a lot of people falling into the same trap. Many years later, I stumbled upon, I think, either a TV series or a paper or maybe a blog from the BBC in London that was talking about a study that came out of Washington State from the Boeing Corporation. And they just call it the Boeing study. And apparently what had happened was the Boeing Corporation were attempting to work out how much money they needed to put aside for the pension programs for their workforce. And it all came down to assessing life expectancy. So what they would do is they would look at when somebody was going to retire from their job, how long they were likely to live, and they would budget, accordingly. So they studied people who worked until the age of 55, which is the earliest point of retirement that they would allow them a pension. They discovered that those people lived into an average age of about 83 years old. So I looked at those numbers and I thought, well, that sounds scientifically correct. Nothing to, get freaked out about here. They then did, and this was where the BBC were shocked about it. They then jumped forward and said, well, let's look at how long do people live when they're 65, because we'll assume that there's less we need to fund in the pension because they've worked another 10 years. And the shocking truth was they discovered that the average life expectancy of a 65-year-old worker was 67. So all of a sudden it's like, that's my father. Yeah. So I started to research this and I could see so many stories like this. And so I spoke to people who were experts in psychology, and they were telling me that of all the things that are the greatest stresses in one's life, the top of the tree is death of a spouse. That's the worst. But 2 down from that is retirement. And the reason is that people don't adjust to it because it's a change of identity. You've worked for 40 years. You identify yourself as your job, who you are. I'm an optometrist. I'm a lawyer. I'm a school teacher, whatever it might be. You identify yourself as that. When people bump into you in Starbucks, and want to start up a conversation, inevitably the question comes up, so what do you do? And you say, well, I'm retired, but I used to be a blah. And that establishes an identity that you yourself embrace and that they start to understand. You take that away. And people don't know how to hold themselves up. Yeah. And that happened to my father. And it's funny, I was telling this story at a financial event in Phoenix in front of a bunch of people of all different varieties, a lot of people from retirement planning, personal finance people. And I thought it was a bit dangerous because they don't want to talk about this stuff because they're looking at, well, how long can we milk the guy out of his, while he's pushing 401k investments and whatever. So I'm like, oh, okay. If I start telling you this, you're going to hate me, but I'm going to tell you the story. And I said the story. And anyway, it went over, finished the speech. I'm cleaning up from the podium afterwards. And this lady comes up to me and she was, I'd say she was about mid-60s. And she says, I heard you talking about the Boeing study and the life expectancy thing. And I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. She's going to have a piece of me here because I probably said something that upset her. And she goes, well, I work for Honeywell. Like, well, I used to work for Honeywell. She retired. I used to be the CFO. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's cool. Well, so yeah, I hope I didn't upset you or anything. No, in fact, she said, we did the exact same studies with our pension program as Boeing did, and we came up with the identical same numbers. I'm like, I couldn't believe it. It's exactly the same. So then I took that information and I went back to researching it, and I discovered that if you're trying to find out what the actual life expectancy of people in the United States are, the best source of that is, of all things, the CDC, the Center of Disease Control. And this is going back pre-COVID when I was doing this research. They used to publish annual life expectancy numbers for US male and US female, and they've been doing it forever. Surprisingly, they don't do it now. At least I haven't seen it yet. It may be something that they stopped doing during COVID or whatever, but they haven't done it for a while. But the last numbers I got, I think I started tracking this at about 2016 through to 2019. In 2016, the US male average life expectancy was 79.5 years, which I guess if I got that age, I'd be pretty happy. If I get beyond it, I'd be ecstatic. But that's numbers don't seem to be out of line. You compare that with a lot of other Western countries like Canada, Western Europe, and so on, and they typically do have a couple of extra years up their sleeve in the way they operate over there. But we're in that sort of area. But if you start tracking it year by year from 2016 to 2019, you see the numbers start dropping. And it goes from 79.5 in 2016 to 75.3 in 2019. In that span of, 4 years, we've lost 4 years of life. And I looked at this and I thought, my God, if this continues at this pace, this exponential drop in life expectancy, you'll be lucky to make 67. Because if you go and work a full life and you're just socking money away for a 65-year-old retirement, well, according to the CDC, if you're a male, you're going to get maybe 8 to 10 years of life out of that. And I thought, this is insane. They haven't published the numbers since COVID because in general, the statistics will skew even worse because of the high death rates that we've seen. But the problem is, what's happening is that we are, if you then look at everything in reverse, we are telling our children at the age of 18 around the kitchen table, when Jimmy or Mary wants to go and, have a career or whatever, and they don't know who they are yet. They haven't had any identity yet. They haven't had any experience. They haven't been around the block. They haven't even traveled. They've got no idea who they are. And yet as parents, and I know this being a parent myself, it's rule number one to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. So what do? We say, sign that bit of paper. I know you're not old enough to even get a beer in a bar in most states, but sign that contract for $100,000 and we're going to send you to this college or that college. And it's okay. You'll do 4 years. You'll have the college experience. You'll come out and you'll be guaranteed a ticket on the middle class train. And this is what we tell our kids, because we as parents are scared to death that we put our kids in harm's way. So we think, put them in a bubble, put them in the university situation. They'll come out the other end and maybe they'll be a doctor or a lawyer or something. And we think of that as we can be as parents proud of that. The reality is 85% of all college graduates don't do what they majored in. That is not their career. And to spend $100,000 that you cannot discharge even in bankruptcy, to go and lose 4 years of potential momentum in life and come out the other end and be accredited in something that you never use is insanity to me. And yet this is normal. And you start looking at the other normalities of this, then, the kids got saddled with the student loan debt, so it takes them longer before they can afford to go in what I call the second quarter of their life, the building phase, where they're trying to build an identity and a career and a family and a house and all those things. Well, that requires capital that you just gave away for the degree that's not helping you.
Right.
So now you've got to undo that mistake very, very quickly and somehow amass enough money to make a deposit so you can buy, say, a home because you want to be on the property ladder. Well, the definition of mortgage in French, if you speak French, is death contract. The whole idea is if you delay the start until, let's say, you're 30 because you've got this student loan debt, you're paying that sucker off until you're 60. The problem also is, let's say that you refinance it, because everyone does 2 or 3 times over, maybe more. And all of a sudden you reset the clock back to zero all the time. You keep resetting the clock. And it's not surprising, as you probably know, that we get to the age of 65 and only about 28% of people can afford to retire. Now, I'm here in Mexico. I'm surrounded by expats, and they all have incredibly rich stories of their lives, what they've done, who they are. And I keep asking the question, well, why are you here? And the common answer is, I can't afford to retire in the USA. And there are always exceptions, right? But I'm surrounded by the people who are living on Social Security and maybe a little bit of extra money. And that statistic you see of the average amount of money people put aside for their retirement, it's like 100,000 or 200,000. That doesn't get you anywhere in life. And so I'm not trying to be morose or depressing about these statistics, but there has to be a better way. There has to be. I'm not going to work for 40 years to just become part of that 78% paycheck to paycheck life and give all of my attention to an employer at a job I probably hate. I'm probably sitting in the cubicle looking out the window and giving him 10% of what I can really do because I'm not passionate about this, right? And I'm going to just roll it out because there's a pension coming or there's retirement coming, or I'm going to hang out until I'm 65. I'm just going to keep stocking my money away. Maybe they've got a great 401k matching program or whatever. It's like you get to 65 and I'm not far from it either, right? But you get to that age and all of a sudden, now I get that chance to go to Germany or Tuscany or whatever. And I got a bad back. Or I got a bad hip, or my eyesight's not as good as it used to be, or, is this what you want to save up for? So I kind of said, this is nuts. Yes, it did work in the 20th century. It really did. But it doesn't work anymore today. And to see the statistics of people my daughter's age, she's 25, the whole concept of like quiet quitting and their attitude towards capitalism and the things that don't really make great deal of sense to me, but that's okay. That's their world. They've got to have the baton and they've got to go with it, and they're going to fall down and they're going to dust themselves off, just like we all did. And hopefully they're strong enough in character, But we've raised a generation of every child wins a prize. So I'm worried about that, but I'm also thinking, okay, you guys are going to be saddled with a challenge to try to work this stuff out, but let's get real about what I call the social mantra, what we think our values are. Go to college, study hard, get a good job, work hard, save, and one day you can retire when you're 65. No. Let's call BS on that right to begin with. And let's say, how about this idea? How about you go off into the world, spend a few years bartending in Tokyo or do whatever you want, and go out there and find yourself in adversarial positions where you can understand the true power you have as an individual. And with that, the confidence that you will bring back and the passion and the observations of who you find yourself to be will therefore denote what you want to be. And maybe then if you need tertiary education, I guarantee you won't be part of an 85% that don't end up doing what they ended up studying. And that's
so I'm somewhat of an example of that. I couldn't afford to go to college. I was the second oldest and my sister went to college. So I went right into a 6-month business school, and then that I paid for, and then I just went to work. And at 50, I got my college degree, but it was in a degree in what I was doing. And so like I had a great GPA because it wasn't one of those things like, do I believe that what I'm learning here I can actually use? And plus I've been there, done that. So I was able to respond well for testing because I lived it practically. And so the degree meant more to me than it might have at my 20s. And it also gave me greater insight because of the confidence that I had been building doing what I did without a college degree, that whenever it came time in my 50s to say, have people tell me that they were better than me, and I was like, no, I know what I can do. And, you know, so my confidence was so much stronger. I always say I appreciated the college experience much more than if I would have done that right out of high school.
Yeah, I actually think I wish more people would do that. I really do, because I think we need doctors, we need nurses, we need people of those qualifications. But more importantly, and I have a lot of friends who are doctors, but more importantly, we need people who have chosen a path that they're passionate about.
Yeah.
And then it's the long way back to your original question. Why should we not worry? Why should we exclude the word retirement from our vocabulary? I believe that if you're doing what you love, it's not work, and therefore why would you ever want to stop doing it?
That's exactly the way I feel. People, when they first of all, they don't realize sometimes that I'm retired, but you know, I think that everything that you do, you should love doing, and not be afraid, if it isn't what you love, to do something else.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times people get in that career and they just stay there. Likewise.
I was going to say, I think a lot of reason for that is that there's a bubble around work, particularly in middle class, say corporate work, because it's probably, I mean, it can be a pain. You know, you're always dealing with somebody else's dream. You're on the boss's timeline, you know, got deadlines to meet that aren't yours. And it can be very frustrating. But at the same time, it's psychologically quite a powerful thing to avoid having to look at yourself in the mirror a lot. You're distracted outward to all of somebody else's projects, and yet you never really look at yourself and realize, what makes me happy? What do I love? What do I embrace? What are my ideals? What are my values? Other than what were taught to me as a child, what have I learned? You know, helping somebody on the side of a road fix a tire, or if you, God forbid, you had to go to war as a soldier, and you know, what did I learn in the trenches with my buddies? How can I take that and know that it empowers me rather than curses me? And then that power that comes from that experience can then be turned around to do good for other people. Those things you don't address those things sitting in a cubicle.
No. Well, and you tend to,
excuse me,
you tend to try to avoid the things that are hard and difficult. And, you know, I always love where you talk about your character as a diamond, and the more rough edges that you polish off and all of that makes you shine so much brighter. And it's going through that, you know, pressure.
excuse me.
Yes, going through the pressure that really is helping you to grow. So why is the wrong sort of debt toxic?
I think whenever you start something new in life, even if I always use these terms like 4 quarters of life, where you've got the first 20 odd years when you're a child and you're under the umbrella of your parents, and really your responsibilities are to learn to communicate, to learn to walk, talk, to learn to learn. And then eventually you leave the nest, and then you go to the second quarter, your building phase. Your third quarter is optimization, where you say, I've actually learned something. I'm now going to try and milk the reward out of as much as I can, because that fourth quarter is your waning period, when you're actually, that's going to be your twilight years, shall we call it. So if we look at it that way, debt that follows you from quarter to quarter is really bad, in my opinion. And that, like any business startup, the first thing they're going to need is capitalization, because they can't do anything until they can actually acquire the things they need, the plant and equipment, the machinery, the licensing, the intellectual property protection, all those things that are needed by any new venture. Those sorts of debts make sense because they're put in context with a payoff. That is, we take on debt, and our goal is to pay it off and to have something bigger than what it was before we did it. But if you don't take that moral mission into it, and you just use debt as an excuse to avoid doing things a little harder in the early stages, then you live in a world where debt is purely toxic, because it's a virus you can't get rid of easily, particularly if it's very long-term debt. We could say, well, people have to get a mortgage because they want to get a home and everything. And I get that. But interestingly, I live here in Mexico. There is no such thing as a mortgage in Mexico. Everything is paid in cash. Homes are passed down the family chain from, parent to child, and will continue to. And although they might not have the most lavish McMansions that you see everywhere in middle-class America, they might. What goes on behind the door when you open it is a really beautiful thing. I mean, the concept of La Familia, the family, where everybody works together and solves the problems as a unit, as a team, is so strong in this culture. It's remarkable. And the one thing, it doesn't come down to money. I've learned over the course of my life that if I need to solve problems, I can either learn how to do it and do it myself, investing time, or I can pay somebody to do it for me, investing money. The problem is, after I've paid somebody to do it for me and I get the problem solved, I am no smarter, no wiser, and no more skilled than I was when I began the process. And I'm poorer. Particularly poorer if I used a credit card or something like that. But I would prefer to be able to embrace the idea of being more of a Renaissance man and learn to do the thing myself. If my car breaks down, how about I learn how to fix it? I've got a leaky roof. How about I get on the ladder and go up there and see why? It's like, we don't do that. And our reason is that we live in a society of what I call a closely coupled society. And what I mean by that, you probably appreciate, and from a business standpoint, is that we have decided that this interconnectedness of things that is part of our Western world is so closely coupled that we cannot afford any link in a chain to break without it destroying everything in its process. The supply chain, recent fiascos we've seen, and can't get toilet paper, or, we're out of eggs, or whatever it might be, are just symptoms of a greater problem, that we are so closely coupled in everything we do that we have absolutely no slack. And because there's no slack, there's no rubberization between the interconnected parts. Everything is like directly joined together. If your bank goes down tomorrow and you can't get that money out of the bank, oh, it's an emergency. If you can't get the Social Security check from the government next week to help pay your rent, I'm going to get evicted. It's like, there's no slack. And we can build a lot of that up to our own advantage to some degree, but we're being told in a world of corporate wealth and Wall Street and more is better, that we should go faster. And I'm looking at this going, no, we should not. We should slow down and build some slack into this so that we can accommodate when things don't go the way we planned. I, as a software developer in a very early age, you learn that most failures that occur in software isn't necessarily because somebody writes bad code, or that's a bit of it, but 90% of it comes from somebody who didn't stop and understand what the requirements were. They never actually asked the question, what should I build here? What do you need me to build? They got a very cursory overview, and it's like, okay, leave it with me. And they rush to the keyboard. Well, that's exactly what I mean. We need to slow down. We need to start to understand and look and question the approaches that we have, not just rush it more all the time, because we're living in a world that just can't handle any more of this. It's going to break.
One of the hardest things as a project lead for me always was whenever I started a program or a project, I always forced them to talk about, what they have, what are they trying to accomplish, where are the gaps, what's the process that you have today, and where does it work and where doesn't it work. And they didn't want to do that beginning information gathering because they wanted to start doing the work.
Right.
And then you had to redo work because you didn't do that beginning stages. Like for me, it's like, take the time in the beginning and you'll save the time in the end.
Absolutely. Measure twice, cut once.
Yeah. So can anyone become financially free in the 21st century, even if they are on a minimum wage job?
Yeah. And the way that I try to teach this is to understand, to run your life like a business, and to not run your life. Firstly, understand the nature of business finance. And I'm not talking about loaning money. I'm talking about how you account for things, particularly things like an income statement or profit and loss statement, and run your life that way. Because when you start realizing that the income you generate at the top is then that's not important. It's not what you earn that matters. It's what you keep. It's what's at the very bottom. And the best way of actually addressing that, and we live in a world where people, they love watching their Instagram influencers or their YouTube celebrities, and they're all flexing out there in their Lambos and, showing off, which is all rented, right? I mean, we know that, but we all love to live in this illusion that one day I too could live like the Kardashians or whatever. I mean, that's how our society believes it should be goal-oriented that way. And yet the problem is that they look to a semblance of success based on what they earn. I earn a 6-figure salary, I earn a 7-figure salary, or whatever. Yet most people end up living in a world of lifestyle inflation where they actually don't keep any of it. And they fall prey to high taxation. They lose a lot of subsidies that they could get if they were earning less money. They don't have as much time, and therefore they outsource most things and learn nothing. And with all of these things, I looked at the whole thing and thought, well, it really doesn't matter how much you earn as long as you earn more than you expend.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we were to turn a profit and loss statement upside down and focus on the expense? And a good friend of mine in Australia said that there was a saying that he was raised within his family, and I think it's so powerful. He goes, $1 saved is $3 earned.
Mm.
And I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because I mean, think about what it takes to have a job, to go and earn money. You know, you have to have a decent car that you can sit in traffic when everyone else does as well, that's not going to blow up on you, so that you can get to the work. You need to dress well. You probably need a Starbucks to kickstart the brain because you're being, you know, expected to perform at a high level. You've got to have a good phone. You've always got to be available, so on and so on. You sell a lot of your relationship with family out without really, I mean, as much as we all want to say, no, we don't do that, I make sure I put my family first. No, I've worked in corporate America long enough to know that doesn't happen, right? But we just don't get real about it. But the cost of having that job can be so expensive, because what I often find, this is kind of comical, is that you go to work, people work hard and they make some money, and if they make a little bit extra money, they will brag to their work buddies that they just bought the latest Mercedes or the latest BMW or whatever, because they want to look like they're all successful when they go to work. And what do you do with that car? Oh, I spend all of my time sitting in traffic to go to work every day. You know, when you don't work at an office and you look at the car in the garage that hasn't been moved for 3 days, and you go, why did I spend $50,000 for that? And then you start realizing it's not what you earn, it's what you keep. And so you start looking at everything upside down. You start pairing off the expenses, and you start working out where your big ticket line items are. Now, if you're smart and you do your numbers properly, this isn't hard to do. But I don't know too many people who do their numbers because they're so frantically in the cycle of, I must make more income, that they don't realize that it's like sand in your hands. It's just going through and you're capturing none of it. So with that said, you could be on minimum wage, which, I mean, like 15 an hour or 20 an hour. What do you think college students do? They can earn that and they can get by quite well. Many of them can make enough money, they end up paying for their college because they pared their expenses back to the absolute bare minimum. And there's 5 of them in a room, and they house hack, and if they want to travel somewhere, they work out how to get a credit card to get frequent flyer points to do it for free. And, you know, it's like, I remember those days. They were fun. How about we do that when we're 50?
See, but the thing that I think keeps a lot of people from doing that is that those people around them trying to compete with others, rather than just saying, I'm just going to make sure I'm happy and not try to be like anybody else. You know, I don't have to have, if my house is big enough for me and my family, then I'm happy with that. It doesn't have to be more because somebody else has more, right?
Exactly. Especially if you can pay that sucker off.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can find a way to pay that thing down, because the golden rule is you can't retire if you've got a mortgage, period. So if you think that way and you do still want to entertain the R word, retire, then you can probably retire early if you can pay the house off. If that's your mission, then go for it. At least you won't be giving, 3 times the amount of the original principal to a banker who's just going to drive their Lambos around Wall Street.
Okay, it's time for rapid fire right now.
Okay.
So there's we're just going to do a few since we're running out of time. But why should people get a passport, which I agree, and travel, which I agree?
Because it widens the vision.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can see much more lateral perspective of something rather than deep diving down the middle.
I agree. It just gives you such better perspective. And share about what your vision is for this Mexico adventure that you're on.
Oh, okay. I'll try and give you a short answer. It's a tricky one though. So in the mid 1990s, from 1990 to 1995, when I landed in California, I was, for the early part of that period, I was stuck in an immigration horrible place where I couldn't get a work permit for about 6 months. And during that time, I was newly married. My wife was working, and I was just sitting around this apartment near, it's a place called Studio City. It's next to Hollywood. And I was raised a musician. I was very lucky to be blessed as a early prodigy violinist. But I gave up the violin after I was about 12 and took up classical guitar and eventually became a guitarist. Anyway, I loved playing guitar. I was in bands in Australia before I left, and I found myself with nothing to do in Hollywood as a guitarist. Wow, what do you think that's going to turn out to be? So, I spend my days going into Guitar Center and just playing all their instruments until they kick me out, and then I go to the next place. Anyway, they used to have these billboards on the thing, like, bandmates wanted, band members wanted, and I applied for a couple of gigs, and I ended up getting in a band that did pretty well there, and we just about got a record deal. And just before this was about to happen, we were being romanced by all these record labels, and then eventually I spent a lot of time in big recording studios because the labels wanted to see how well you do in a studio environment. And being a technical guy, I always loved the studio because I could see on the other side of the glass there was all this knobs and wonderful,
cool
technical,
stuff.
Cool gadgety stuff, and lights blinking and everything. And so I started befriending the engineers and the producers, and one guy who happened to be the producer for the band Tears for Fears had said to me, the music industry was going through a transition from what they called analog, which is when everyone recorded onto tape, into digital, where everyone started to record in the computers and so on. And I was a computer guy. And so he says to me, how about you teach me about these computers and networks and all that stuff, and I'll teach you about the recording studio. I'm like, are you kidding? Of course.
Jump on that one.
What a deal, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that's what happened. I ended up spending way too much time in recording studios, and I eventually built my own studio. And anyway, things go along with this journey. Fast forward to 1995, 96, somewhere around there. I am working in Hollywood at this horrible old dingy recording studio called Grandmaster Recorders. And I was like a contract engineer working there because studios, you can work at night. I had a day job, but you could work at night because that's when most of the work was done anyway. So I'd pick up contracts doing that. And I did some really great bands. A lot of them, I was working for Capitol Records as a freelance engineer, helping them develop acts that they were trying to bring over to Capitol EMI. Anyway, I loved it, and I was getting along great with all the musicians, and because I can understand them, and I'm playing with all this really cool stuff. And one day the guy upstairs comes down and he says, look, we've got this band coming in from out of state next week. Can you do it? Can you engineer? They've got a producer, but they don't really have an engineer. So you know our gear better than anybody. Can you take care of these guys? And I'm like, sure, yeah, no problem. So I signed it up. It just so happened 2 days later, I get a phone call from Australia. My mother had had a car accident and I had to go back down there to take care of her. And as it happened, she was in such a bad state, which we weren't aware of, that I ended up living there for 4 years, and she eventually passed away before I came back to Australia, back to the United States. But that was, I had to call up the guy at the studio and go, look, I'm sorry, buddy, I can't do it. I've got to go back. And he goes, fair enough. You do it. I'll find somebody else. Anyway, so 20 odd years later, 25 years later, I'm in Guadalajara in Mexico, and I'm getting shoulder surgery done from some leftover work that happened from a car accident I was in. And it was great, fantastic medical. If you ever want to get really, really good, high quality medical cheap, that's the place to go. But anyway, I digress. I'm sitting in an Airbnb in Guadalajara because I didn't want to leave the city until everything is stabilized. So I planned to be there for 4 weeks. My wife and I were just in this Airbnb. And of course, I'm sitting around, what am I going to do? So I brought one of those little set-top Android TV player things and plugged into the TV in the HDMI port there, and I'm watching YouTube videos all day. Stupid waste of time. But no, it was a lot of fun. But I kept gravitating to people who are in the recording business, in music. It was like I put this aside for 20-something years to raise a daughter and raise a family and have a career and focus on all of that. And then here I am sitting in this unit, and on comes this episode about this guy who was the producer for the Foo Fighters, one of the biggest bands ever. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll listen to this guy. He says, oh, yeah, well, I brought them, we're up in Seattle and they're doing this thing and they wanted to record this album. They came down to Hollywood and we did it in this studio called Grandmaster Recorders. And I'm like, what? That's where I used to work. Like, oh, wow, that's cool. Tell me more. So he starts telling the story and he tells about, how they came down and they did all this stuff. And then he dropped the date of this, and it was like my face went white, pale. I was supposed to be the engineer on that project. And I sat there, my wife looked at me and she's like, what's wrong? I'm like, and I explained it and she's like, oh my God, you were supposed to be the engineer on the second Foo Fighters album, the biggest one they ever had. That was you. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh. So she says, we've got to fix this. I'm like, well, how do you fix that? Well, I can't go back in time. I'm not Doctor Who. And she's like, no, you've got 20 odd years of working opportunity or, energy left in you. Why don't you go back and try and rekindle that part of your life now? Because I was getting really dejected in the software game. I wasn't interested in it. And I said, well, how could we do that? And the more the gears start moving ahead, and the next thing you know, well, we could sell some real estate, we could do this, we could cash this out, we could blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, I buy an acre of land with a bullfighting ring on it, demolish the ring, and now I'm building the recording studio, which I now find out, because I tend to do things go big or go home for some reason, it's going to be the largest recording studio in Latin America. And it just so happens I've been traveling all over the world sourcing little pieces of gear for this studio. And I've collected so many, I guess you call it museum pieces that are from history. I have the microphone that AC/DC used from all through the 70s until 1979 for every single one of their albums. Bon Scott sang into this microphone. I have it sitting in a drawer here.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it's like a classic piece of history. I found a recording console in a storage locker in New Jersey in the middle of the freezing cold. I had to go there and resurrect this thing, which is this massive thing the size of a car, and somehow get it crated and shipped to Mexico. And I did it. And it's sitting here in San Miguel ready for the studio. The studio is an exact replica of George Martin, who used to be the producer of the Beatles. His studio in the Caribbean, which was famous, Air Studios Montserrat. It's where Dire Straits did all of their Brothers in Arms, like Money for Nothing. It's where Elton John did his work. Rolling Stones reformed there. Jimmy Buffett. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I made friends with some of the guys who originally built that studio, who are still surprisingly alive. And now they're helping me build mine because it's going to be an exact replica of that studio.
Well, we're gonna have to have you back when that
Yeah.
is done, to just kind of give us some insights as to what you're doing with that,
Running a
and
recording studio
showing
in
us some
Mexico.
pictures and things.
For sure.
It is time now for me to quickly show my slides of how you can get in contact. So you can go to his website, which is www.beunconstrained.com. Again, that's www.beunconstrained.com. His Twitter is the same, Be Unconstrained. He has a podcast, the Unconstrained podcast, and a blog. And if you just want to mention the blog is also Be Unconstrained. Is that correct?
It's on the website. So yeah,
it's on
they
the
can just go to the website,
right,
and find all the articles.
So I would encourage you all to check out his website, check out the podcast, and also the blog, and comment on how you like what he has out there. Also, go ahead and make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. It has been such a great time hearing your stories. I could probably spend hours talking to you. We'll have to definitely do this again.
Okay,
and
sure.
You think you'll have that done in that compound done in 6 months?
No problem. Easy. Easy.
Awesome. Well, it has been such a joy talking with you. I, again, could have talked with you for hours and hours. You're so interesting and such great information shared. Again, everyone go to beunconstrained.com. As always, I tell everyone that life is a journey and it is up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Nettling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nettling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.